The wind across the high plains had a voice, a hollow moan that scraped along the bones of the earth and promised nothing but emptiness. It was a language Silas Thorne understood better than the clipped, scornful words of his own kin. He stood on the edge of the paltry acreage his father had deeded him, less a gift than a banishment, and watched the sun bleed out across the horizon, staining the bruised clouds in shades of rust and violet. The land was all rock and regret, a place where only the hardiest, most stubborn things survived. Silas, in his own way, was one of them. He was a giant of a man, built on a scale that made the world seem ill-fitting. Doors were too small, chairs too fragile, and the expectations of men like his father and brother were impossibly narrow. They saw his size and saw only clumsiness, a slow mind, an aberration. God spent so long on the frame, his brother Jedediah used to sneer over supper. He had no time left for the finish. The laughter that followed was always thin and cruel, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. His father's silence was worse, a heavy, damning blanket of disappointment. The final severance had been over a matter of a fence line. A simple dispute with a neighbor that Jedediah's sharp tongue had escalated into a bitter feud. Silas, attempting to mediate with his slow, deliberate manner, had only made things worse. He had been accused of siding with a stranger over his own blood. The ensuing argument in the dusty yard of the family homestead had been the culmination of a lifetime of slights. His father, his face a mask of cold fury, had pointed a trembling finger toward the barren northern tract. "Go, then," he had spat, the words carrying the finality of a nail being driven into a coffin lid. "Go to your rocks and your silence. You are no son of mine." Silas had not argued. He had simply turned his broad back, collected the few possessions that were his, and walked away, the weight of his own existence a physical burden on his shoulders. He built a sod house with his bare hands, the thick bricks of earth and grass a testament to his brute strength. It was a lonely, crude shelter against the ceaseless wind, a place where the silence was so profound it echoed with the ghosts of words he wished he could have said. Loneliness was a cold stone in his gut. He was an island in a sea of grass, a man whose own blood had declared him foreign. It was during the lean months, when the jerky was gone and the parched earth offered little, that he found them. He had been tracking a scrawny deer for 2 days, his hunger a dull ache that sharpened his senses. He found not the deer, but a scene of quiet devastation in a shallow, wind-scoured arroyo, the remnants of a small camp, the canvas of a travois slashed and abandoned, and the women, for of them, huddled together near a cluster of pinyon pines, their faces stoic masks of grief and exhaustion. They were Apache, that much was clear from their calico dresses and high moccasins. They did not startle when his immense shadow fell over them. They simply watched him, their dark eyes holding a depth of sorrow and resilience that shamed his own self-pity. The eldest, her face a beautiful map of dignified hardship, held a hand up, not in greeting or warning, but as a simple statement of presence. "We are here." He saw no men, no warriors, only these 4 women, their possessions scattered and broken around them. He could have walked away. It was the sensible thing to do. They were not his concern, not his people. Jedediah's voice echoed in his memory, dripping with venom. Savages. But Silas saw something else. He saw in their stillness the same stubborn refusal to be broken that he felt in his own heart. He saw 4 islands in the same unforgiving sea. He unslung the nearly empty water skin from his shoulder and held it out. He had no words for them, and he knew they had none for him. But the gesture was a language unto itself. The eldest woman, Nalin, accepted it with a slow, deliberate nod. She drank, then passed it to the others, to the fierce-eyed one, Cully, who watched his every move as if he were a coiled snake, to the gentle-faced one, Hania, who had a healer's calm about her, and finally to the youngest, Yaji, a girl on the cusp of womanhood, whose eyes darted like a frightened sparrow. They were a family, shattered but not separated. That night they shared his meager fire. He offered the last of his salted pork, and they produced a handful of roasted mesquite beans. It was a silent, solemn communion. He learned through Nalin's careful gestures and a few shared words of Spanish that their band had been attacked by raiders. The men were gone. They were all that was left. They were heading for the sanctuary of the high mountains. But their journey was perilous and their supplies non-existent. Silas looked from their weary faces to the vast, indifferent darkness that surrounded them. He thought of his cold sod house, of the crushing weight of his solitude. In that moment a decision formed, not in his mind, but in the core of his being. It was a choice born of shared desolation. He pointed a large, calloused finger back the way he had come, then at himself, then at them. He was offering sanctuary. Nalin studied his face for a long time, her gaze probing past his size, past the rough beard and the quiet sadness in his eyes. She saw perhaps not a threat but a fellow outcast. She gave a single, sharp nod. The pact was sealed, not with vows or laws, but with the quiet understanding of the abandoned. When word eventually trickled back to his family, carried by a lone trapper, the story became twisted and monstrous. Silas Thorne, the family simpleton, had taken up with 4 Apache squaws. The mockery was surely boundless now, the shame complete. Silas did not know this, and he would not have cared. For the first time in his life, the silence in his home was not empty. It was filled with the soft sounds of moccasins on the dirt floor, the quiet rhythm of breathing, a presence that pushed back against the vast, lonely dark. The first weeks were a delicate, unspoken negotiation. The women moved with a quiet efficiency that made Silas feel clumsy and loud in his own home. They were ghosts of purpose, their hands always busy. Hania, he quickly learned, possessed a deep knowledge of the land. She would disappear for hours and return with roots that could be ground into flour, leaves that soothed his blistered hands, and herbs that made a bitter but fortifying tea. She moved with a gentle grace, her presence a calming balm in the harsh environment. Cully was the protector. She was never without a knife at her belt and her eyes missed nothing. She sharpened arrowheads by the fire, her movements precise and deadly. She watched Silas constantly, her suspicion a palpable force. She did not trust his size, did not trust his intentions. He understood. The world had given her no reason to trust men like him. Nalin was the anchor. She directed their days with a glance or a quiet word, her authority absolute and unquestioned. She was the keeper of their story, the vessel of their dignity. And then there was Yaji. She was a shadow, flitting at the edges of his perception. She was the one who would vanish before dawn and return after dusk, her purpose a mystery he did not yet understand. Silas focused on what he knew: hard labor. He reinforced the sod house, chinking the cracks with mud and grass until it was impervious to the wind. He dug a deeper well, his powerful shoulders making short work of the stubborn, rocky soil. He built a sturdy corral from felled juniper trees, though he owned no livestock. It was an act of faith, of building a future he couldn't yet envision. He worked from sunup to sundown, the physical exertion a way to quiet the restless noise in his head. The women watched him. They saw how he moved with a surprising economy of motion for such a large man, how his strength was applied with purpose, not brute force. They saw that he asked for nothing, that he shared his food without expectation, that he gave them space and respected their silence. One evening, as a storm gathered, lashing the plains with cold rain, Cully found him checking the knots on the makeshift door. She held out a newly fletched arrow. She pointed to the gray goose feathers, then to the sinew wrapping. It was not an offering of peace, not yet, but it was a demonstration of skill. A statement: this is who I am. This is what I can do. He took the arrow, felt its perfect balance, and nodded his appreciation. It was a conversation without a single word. The trust, when it came, was not a sudden flood but a slow, seeping tide. It began with Hania. He had gashed his leg badly on a sharp rock while clearing stones for a small garden plot. The wound was deep, angry, and weeping. He had cleaned it as best he could, but by the second day, a fever had taken hold. He lay on his pallet, shivering and disoriented. He was vaguely aware of Hania kneeling beside him, her touch cool on his forehead. She cleaned the wound with a decoction of boiled herbs that smelled of pine and earth. She packed it with a poultice of chewed leaves and bound it tightly with clean strips of calico. For 3 days, she tended to him, forcing bitter teas between his cracked lips, changing the dressing, her presence a constant, reassuring calm. When the fever finally broke, he woke to find Nalin watching him, her expression unreadable. Kuli stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her suspicion warring with a grudging respect. He had been vulnerable, completely at their mercy. They had chosen to heal him. It was Yaji who revealed the secret. A week after his recovery, as he was splitting firewood, she approached him, her usual shyness replaced by a quiet urgency. She tugged on his sleeve and gestured toward the series of low, rolling hills to the east. He followed her, his long strides easily keeping pace with her light, quick steps. She led him through a narrow, hidden cut in the rock, a passage he had never noticed before. The path opened into a wide, secluded basin, a green sanctuary fed by a hidden spring. And there, scattered across the basin, were the horses. It was not a small herd. Dozens upon dozens of them, their coats a shifting tapestry of color. Bays, pintos, roans, and blacks. They were magnificent animals, strong-limbed and wild-eyed, the descendants of Spanish barbs, bred for endurance and spirit. They moved with a fluid grace, a living river of muscle and bone. Silas stopped, stunned into silence. He counted, his lips moving silently, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of it. It was more than 100, closer to 200. The herd was a fortune, a king's ransom on the hoof. It was power. It was survival. Yaji made a low, whistling sound, and a handsome bay stallion trotted toward her, nuzzling her hand. This was her domain. This was the reason for her long absences. She was the herd's guardian, its keeper. Later that evening, as the fire danced and cast long shadows on the sod walls, Nalin told him their story. She used the sparse Spanish they shared, supplemented by the universal language of gesture and expression. The horses were the legacy of her people, the Chihen, the red paint people. The herd was their lifeblood, carefully bred and fiercely protected for generations. The raiders who had attacked their camp had not known of the hidden basin. The women had managed to lead the herd away in the chaos, saving the soul of their tribe even as its body was broken. They were not just 4 defenseless women. They were the custodians of a nation's wealth, the keepers of its future. Silas looked at them, truly seeing them for the first time. He saw not refugees, but queens in exile. Nalin, the wise matriarch. Kuli, the fierce warrior. Hania, the life-giving healer. Yaji, the master of the herd. And he, the clumsy giant, had somehow become their protector. The weight of his family's derision, the sting of being called a simpleton, seemed to evaporate in the warm firelight. He had stumbled into a responsibility far greater than any fence line, a purpose far nobler than earning a grudging nod from his father. He was part of this now, this small, resilient tribe of 5, bound together by loss and circumstance, holding a secret that could get them all killed. He felt a profound shift within him. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by the heavy, solid weight of purpose. He was a guardian. He was home. The seasons turned. Summer baked the plains to a hard, cracked shell, and winter buried them under a blanket of silent, unforgiving snow. The small sod house became a home, a fortress of quiet solidarity. Silas's strength found its true purpose. He built a low stone wall around the entrance to the hidden basin, making it defensible. He hauled water, hunted game with a renewed focus, and stood as a silent, formidable watchman against the vast emptiness. His size, once a source of shame, was now their greatest shield. The women, in turn, transformed the harsh land into a place of sustenance. Hania's garden flourished with squash, beans, and corn, coaxed from the stubborn soil. Kuli taught Silas the art of the silent hunt, how to read the wind and the tracks, how to become a part of the landscape. Nalin's wisdom guided them, her knowledge of the seasons and the old ways ensuring their survival. And Yaji, with her profound connection to the horses, managed the herd with an instinct that felt like magic. She would thin the herd selectively, trading a few horses for salt, flour, and ammunition in a distant settlement where they were not known, always ensuring the core bloodlines remained strong and hidden. The union between them was never spoken of in conventional terms. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of survival, deeper than any vows spoken before a preacher. It was in the way Hania would leave a poultice for his aching muscles after a day of heavy work, the way Kuli would hand him a perfectly balanced arrow, the way Yaji would bring the proud bay stallion for him to admire, and the way Nalin would meet his gaze across the fire with an expression of shared, quiet understanding. He was their husband in the only way that mattered. He was their protector, their provider, their partner. He defended their home, and they, in turn, gave him one. One afternoon, while mending a harness, he looked up and saw the four of them working together, tanning a hide. The rhythmic scrape of their tools, their shared, low conversation in their own tongue, the effortless way they moved around each other. It was a portrait of strength and unity. A deep, unfamiliar emotion swelled in his chest. It was not pride in possession, but a profound sense of belonging. He was a part of this. He was necessary. The thought was so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. The outside world rarely intruded. A passing trapper, a distant dust cloud. These were noted and watched with cautious vigilance until they disappeared. But Silas knew such peace was fragile. The world was full of hungry, greedy men, and a secret as large as 222 horses could not stay hidden forever. The past had a long shadow, and his was cast in the shape of his brother. The confrontation came in the autumn, when the cottonwoods along the creek bed turned a brilliant, defiant gold. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, moving with an arrogant certainty that made the hair on Silas's neck stand up. As the rider drew closer, the familiar silhouette became undeniable. It was Jedediah. He rode a fine horse, a stark contrast to the rugged mustangs of the basin, and his clothes were those of a man who had prospered. He reined in a short distance from the sod house, his eyes sweeping over the scene with undisguised contempt. He saw the Apache women, who had melted back into the shadows of the doorway, and a sneer twisted his lips. "So, the rumors are true," Jedediah called out, his voice laced with the old, familiar mockery. "Traded your family for a pack of savages. Father was right about you. Not a lick of sense." Silas said nothing. He simply rose to his full, intimidating height, his hands hanging loose at his sides. He was no longer the boy who flinched at his brother's words. He was a man defending his home. "What do you want, Jedediah?" His voice was a low rumble, the sound of rocks grinding together. Jedediah's gaze flickered past him, scanning the well-built corral, the tidy garden, the signs of a life far more successful than the barren exile he had envisioned for his brother. His eyes narrowed, searching for the source of this unexpected stability. "Came to see the freak show for myself," he said, dismounting. "Came to see how far you'd fallen." He took a step closer, his eyes suddenly catching movement on the hills behind the house. A small group of horses, part of the larger herd, was grazing near the ridgeline. It was only a dozen or so, but their quality was unmistakable. Jedediah's sneer faded, replaced by a stark, naked avarice. His eyes widened as he scanned the hills, trying to pierce the distance, a man suddenly smelling gold. "My God, Silas!" He breathed, the mockery gone, replaced by covetous awe. "Where did you get these animals?" Silas moved to block his brother's view, his body a solid wall of muscle and resolve. "They are not yours to worry about," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You should leave," but the seed of greed had been planted. Jedediah saw it all now. The women were not a sign of his brother's degradation, but the key to some unimaginable wealth. He looked at Silas, at the four women who now stood silently behind him, and he saw only obstacles. "You always were a fool, Silas," Jedediah said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You don't know what to do with a fortune like this. But I do. We could be partners. Just like old times, the offer was poison. A snake disguised as a branch of peace. There are no old times, Silas replied. There is only this. Now go. Jedediah's face hardened into a mask of rage. He remounted his horse, his eyes burning with resentment and thwarted greed. You'll regret this, you simple giant, he snarled, before wheeling his horse around and galloping away, a receding storm of dust and malice. Silas watched him go, a cold certainty settling in his stomach. This was not over. Jedediah would be back, and he would not come alone. The week that followed was one of tense preparation. There was no discussion, no debate. There was only a shared, silent understanding of the coming storm. Cully spent her days high in the rocks, watching the horizon, her bow always strung. Hania prepared food and water, gathering medicinal herbs for wounds not yet inflicted. Nalin walked the perimeter of their land, her eyes seeing things Silas could not, planning their defense in the theater of her mind. Yaji moved the bulk of the herd deeper into the hidden canyons, leaving only a small, visible contingent as bait. Silas, meanwhile, worked relentlessly. He reinforced the stone wall at the mouth of the basin, creating a formidable barricade. He felled a massive cottonwood tree, positioning it so that it could be rolled to block the narrowest part of the trail leading to their home. He was a force of nature, his grief and rage from a lifetime of humiliation channeled into a single, focused purpose: to protect his family. They came at dawn, just as Nalin had predicted. A dozen riders, led by Jedediah, their dark forms silhouetted against the rising sun. They were not ranchers. They were hard men, hired for their ruthlessness. They rode with the swagger of bullies who expected an easy victory. They saw a lone giant and 4 women, an obstacle to be swept aside. They did not see the intricate trap that had been laid for them. Jedediah pointed toward the small group of horses grazing on the open hillside. There they are, boys. Easy money, he shouted, his voice echoing in the cold morning air. As they spurred their horses forward, Cully loosed her first arrow from a high, concealed position. It struck the lead rider, who tumbled from his saddle with a cry of surprise. The attack was so sudden, so silent, it threw the men into confusion. They fired their rifles wildly into the rocks, but their target was a ghost. A second arrow found its mark. Panic began to set in. It's just one damn Indian, Jedediah roared, trying to rally his men. Spread out. Go around. As a group of them broke off, galloping toward the trail that led to the sod house, Silas put his shoulder to the massive cottonwood log. With a great guttural roar, he sent it tumbling down the incline. It crashed onto the trail with the force of an avalanche, blocking the path completely, spooking the horses and sending one rider flying. The battle had been joined. From the rocks above, Hania and Nalin began to push smaller boulders down, not to kill, but to create chaos, to hem the attackers in. Their defense was a symphony of preparation and knowledge of the land. Then came the thunder. It started as a low rumble, a vibration felt in the soles of their boots, and grew to a deafening roar. Yaji appeared on the high ridge behind the remaining attackers, a slim, solitary figure. With a piercing cry, she urged the main herd forward. 200 horses, a living, breathing avalanche of hooves and fury, poured down from the hidden canyons. The ground shook. It was not a stampede of mindless panic, but a controlled, directed charge. The raiders, caught between the rockslide and the oncoming herd, had only seconds to react. They turned and fled, their greed forgotten in a primal wave of terror. They were scattered, their horses bolting, their formation broken. Jedediah, his face a mask of disbelief and fear, was thrown from his horse as the tide of animals swept past him. He scrambled to his feet, disarmed and humiliated, and ran, a pathetic figure swallowed by the vast plains he had sought to conquer. The dust settled slowly, revealing the quiet aftermath. The attackers were gone, vanished. Silas stood by the barricade, his chest heaving, his hands raw. The 4 women came to stand beside him. Kuli with her bow, Hania with her calm gaze, Yaji with the pride of a general, and Nalin with her timeless wisdom. They looked out over their land, their home, which they had defended together. No words were needed. In the shared silence, a new reality was forged. Silas looked at Jedediah's retreating form, a small speck of dust in the distance, and felt nothing. Not hatred, not pity, not even triumph. His brother was a ghost from another life, a life of shame and loneliness that no longer belonged to him. He turned his gaze to the women at his side. He saw Nalin's nod of profound respect. He saw the fierce loyalty that had replaced suspicion in Kuli's eyes. He saw the gentle strength in Hania's smile. He saw the unshakable confidence in Yaji. These were his people. This was his family. The world could mock him, could call him a giant, a simpleton, an outcast. It no longer mattered. Here, on this harsh and beautiful land, surrounded by this fierce and loving family, he was not just a man. He was a husband. He was a guardian. He was, at long last, whole. The wind still moaned across the plains, but now, it no longer sounded of emptiness. It sang a song of resilience.